Excellent.
Everything you say is part of the permanent record now.
Oh man.
Yeah, man. So you got Aaron, you got your I would say monthly or bi-monthly like uh storm on Twitter
I did.
of people attacking you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
read
What was
the post and so everyone
Yeah.
can. Okay, the post says thesis Tolkien's characters in The Lord of the Rings, Denethor accepted, don't change psychologically. Their relationships with other characters do. For example, Gimli and Legolas. At most, Tolkien's characters change briefly, Gollum, Boromir, and then revert back to default. This isn't a criticism of Tolkien, who I love, just an observation.
Mm, that
And
yeah, that
that,
sounds like that's heresy or something.
yeah, that post has 937,000 engagements.
Wow. Wow. So what is the, I mean, what is the strong counter to that? I mean, I don't, I'm actually not that familiar with the Lord of the Rings. Like, I can't really speak to details because I
Hmm.
saw the movies 15 years ago or whatever it was.
Right.
Um, so, or maybe more than that now, geez. Um, so what is the counter to that? I mean,
Yeah.
what are
So
people saying?
for a little context, in my fiction writing classes this semester, I decided to teach the Fellowship of the Ring. I often have students who are interested in doing fantasy stuff, so I thought,
Hmm.
well, let's look at the master of this genre and kind of the inventor of the genre, in
Hmm.
my opinion. And so I was kind of making notes about what Tolkien does with his characters and just posted that. Not even as like when I say thesis, I mean it was just a idea in my head. I think the strongest reactions to that post had to do with Frodo because he returns home to the Shire after his adventure and clearly has what we would call PTSD now and can't stay and gets on a ship and departs Middle Earth to you know kind of Tolkien's heaven, Valinor.
Mm.
Um, and so I think people who disagreed with that and mentioned Frodo's PTSD probably are on better argumentative in a better argumentative position. And I'm still thinking about it. They could be right. They could be
Hmm.
right.
Well, certainly not all of the characters undergo some massive psychological change, right? I mean,
No, and again, it wasn't a criticism of Tolkien,
yeah,
and I wouldn't want him to do anything different. It was seriously just an observation. It may be an inaccurate observation,
yeah.
but one of the things I started charting out character arcs all the way through. And so you have to have a balance of static and dynamic characters, or
Hmm.
what Ian Forster would call round and flat. And a round character is basically a character who changes. A flat character is a character who doesn't.
Hmm.
Um, and you need a mix of those. Like you need static characters. They need to remain who they are. So
Oh,
Legos,
if you're gonna have a plot of any kind, yeah, for
that's
sure.
right.
Yeah.
So Legolas and Gimli, elf and dwarf, at first start their relationship hating each other and then gradually become best friends. Now that is a change in the relationship of those characters, and in those characters' attitudes towards elves and dwarves, respectively. I'm not sure that I would in that particular instance. Um, argue that as a like character change on the level of Francis McComber and Hemingway's story, or just, I mean, throw a dart in any direction.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want them to change more than that. I think they do exactly what they need to be doing in that story.
Yeah.
Um, so the strongest argument against my position is the Frodo argument. I think the
Hmm.
weakest argument was someone, and I won't out the person. They said Gandalf dies and literally comes back another person. I'm like,
Mm.
Gandalf dies and literally comes back another color. Like
Mm.
he's Gandalf the gray and then he's Gandalf the white. That isn't, I don't see that Gandalf has
Right.
changed psychologically in any kind of meaningful way. And I
Right.
don't think he should. I
Right.
think he's doing, but like, yeah, I mean, so that's the
Yeah, I
weakest
mean,
argument.
there would be a way of writing this where, yeah, maybe all the characters do go through a psychological change, but then it would lose a lot of this. It's to me, it seems like it would then lose a lot of the things that make it what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of an action adventure story,
Yeah.
right?
It's a
And
quest story.
yeah, yeah, we're not trying to necessarily show and to me, Frodo, again, I don't my expertise in the narrative, but like what I know of it. uh Frodo's the only one who really needs to maybe even needs to change for there to be a sort of dramatic arc to the thing. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, in a similar sense, like mythologically, if you look at the myths that people know, I mean, how many of them are include a character actually changing? I don't
Right.
know,
I,
and Tolkien's playing somewhere between mythology and
that's
right. I mean,
right.
he's yeah.
How much does Odysseus change in the
Well,
Odyssey?
yeah, I mean he certainly goes through a lot.
That's
Does
right.
he does he actually become characterologically a different sort of person?
I don't see it that way. Like personally, I don't see it that way.
I no, I guess I don't either. Yeah, he seems like the same guy. He's older and he's gone through things, but it doesn't seem like he's uh the typical earmarks of a person changing, you don't really see. I mean, like you see in a piece of fiction, and I've done this before too. You want to show a character changes. Well, you put them in a similar situation near the end that they were in near the beginning, and
Hmm.
they act
Hmm.
different. That's like the easiest. That's the easiest whiteboard a diagrammable way of showing a character changing, right? I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think I don't think Odysseus I don't think Odysseus does approaches things differently at the end, but I could be
I don't
wrong.
see him as changing psychologically in the
Yeah.
Odyssey. I guess you could argue a change between the Iliad and the Odyssey, possibly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a classic scholar. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of the epics. I don't know the Aeneid well enough
Yeah.
to make arguments about that. It does occur to me that Beowulf changes
Okay.
between the time of the Grendel and Grendel's mother storyline, and then about two-thirds of the way through that poem, there's a flash forward in time, and Beowulf is an old king.
I do
And
remember this. Yeah.
a dragon comes out and is afflicting the land, and Beowulf decides he's going to go confront it, even though he's a king, and he ought to be allowing like his younger warriors to meet that threat.
Right.
And his hubris doesn't allow him to do that, and he gets killed because of it. It does seem like potentially there's some kind of change happening from the cagey chieftain at the beginning of that poem to the overreaching king toward the
Mm.
end. I'm trying to think of other epics in which the protagonist changes. I don't know. That might be a line of inquiry
Yeah.
to think
Yeah.
about in the future.
Yeah.
Um, I the weird thing is since my stupid post was just an idea about Tolkien I was kind of testing,
Yeah.
that enough people saw it as some sort of like attack on Tolkien or something. Like
Right. Right.
that was kind of
Yeah.
odd to me.
That was what was interesting to see. It's sort of yeah, it felt like it was a line drawn in the sand. That's how people interpreted it, which was
Yeah,
yeah, it seems like it seems like a pretty I mean, on the one hand, it's like, okay, let's say you're wrong. Okay,
yeah,
that's
fine.
pretty harmless that you're wrong, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just a
and I put
different opinion on a book. I mean, it's not,
yeah, and it wasn't even. And someone said this is a really awful take, and I was like, it's
yeah.
not a take; it's a thesis. It's like
Right, right.
it's an idea I'm testing. Like, do you know what a
Yeah.
thesis is?
Right, 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 right.
Like, this
Yeah,
isn't. Yeah, this isn't like a
well,
grand unified, declaration. This isn't.
yeah.
This isn't an act of Congress, right?
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, we're unprinting all of Tolkien now because
Yeah,
he doesn't
yeah.
have any characters who change. Sorry. Yeah.
And I even included like this isn't an attack on Tolkien, who I love.
Right.
It's just an
Mhm.
observation. But anyway,
Yeah.
doesn't
Well,
matter. The
well,
interesting thing
Aaron,
is that touched a nerve.
yeah. Well, and Aaron, I've over the few years I've known you now, I've seen you this happens to you periodically.
Yeah.
I mean, part part of the reason is, you've got a pretty sizable Twitter account for sure, but there does seem to be like I'm recalling the Borges flap of
Oh my
2024.
gosh. I never see him coming. Yeah, the Borges flap was it was right after McCarthy died, and
Yeah.
John Sepich had the McCarthy scholar had uploaded some conversations he
Mm.
had with McCarthy. And in one of these conversations, McCarthy says this thing about Borges being um, a world class writer, and he had this
Mm.
tremendous respect for Borges. And I was kind of reading through these conversations and then posting about them. And I said something like, I quoted the Borges thing, and then like, with asterisk, orders all of Borges.
Right.
And then I think someone said, you haven't read Borges?
Right.
And I said, I don't think so. And then like a number of people like really were like, how can you be an English professor? And
Right.
I didn't even correct that. The thing that I realized, I didn't even post about this. The thing that I realized after like I ordered his collected short fiction
Hmm.
was I had read Borges. But which is more egregious? Like the
Right.
professor who never read Borges, or the professor who read Borges and then forgot he read Borges?
I
Like,
mean, you kind of realize this is sort of a Borges story. Like
yeah,
this
totally right. Oh
happening,
my gosh,
right?
you're
Right.
right.
All of this shit happens to you because you didn't read it, but you actually had read it. That's a very real life. That's Borges meets real life for sure.
Yeah, and I believe it was the Library of Babel that I was reading, and I was like, oh, I've read this. And then I was reading
Mm-hmm.
another, and I was like, I think I read this too.
Right,
It's
right, right.
weird though. I mean, I know that Borges has, different kinds of stories over
Yes.
his corpus, right?
Hmm.
There's a particular kind of Borges story that it's almost essayistic. Like the
Hmm.
Library of Babel, it like puts forward this like fictional thesis
Yeah.
almost about this
Well,
land that exists,
yeah. You talk about
right?
characters not changing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
But yeah.
which is what he does is obviously interesting
Hmm.
and great. But like, yeah, it does what we're talking about. My Borges flap kind of does remind me of a Borges story
Yeah.
with
It's
like a more essayistic, not one of the knife fighting,
right, 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 right.
out
Yeah, where
on
it's sort of a thought experiment, and there's like a sort of an irony in it within it that reaches almost cosmic proportions. Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I've
Yeah, yeah.
actually been reading back through Borges. Borges is good because, well, many reasons, but he's a good one that you can kind of read here and there because he never wrote anything longer than 14 pages. So
Amazing.
I just started since the new year. I read a Borges short story every day, and it's
Oh, it's really cool.
10 minutes, whatever. So, I just kind of finished up his first collection, which is what is it? The Universal Something of Infamy. And they're
Hmm.
almost like article entries, but they're all about like
Right.
infamous people, criminals, and that sort of thing. And each one is, but it's written very interestingly and at times poetically. But there's one about Billy the Kid. There's one about this famous female Chinese pirate. There's one about about this sort of megalomaniacal slave trader in Mississippi. And
Hmm.
they don't feel like Library of Babel at all. They're
Hmm.
kind of their own thing. So yeah, he's
Interesting.
a he's a man of many talents for sure. But yeah, I was just thinking, man, I was like, Aaron, when I saw the Tolkien thing, we were like, we'll talk about it a little bit. I was like, man, Aaron gets these. I don't know that I've ever had I mean, I've had some social media posts get a lot of impressions, but I don't know that I've ever really gotten significant grief for one. Um, yeah, so I don't know if I'm just being too careful or what.
Yeah, I like again, like the ones that this has only happened to me when I mean, I don't expect the post to get that much engagement at all. Like these are things I
Yeah,
just kind of throw out,
sure.
or sometimes like I never thought the Borges thing would be like so I couldn't have predicted it. So I'm not even trying to be like
Yeah, you're not like
controversial.
intentionally
No, I'm
provocative. I don't
not.
read any of it as
No,
intentionally
no,
provocative.
no.
Yeah,
And I thought my Tolkien thing was pretty milk toast. I thought it was kind of
yeah,
milk toast. I mean,
yeah.
my more controversial take on great stories and just viewing them as stories. Were we talking about the Passion of the Christ?
I don't think we did really. No.
Okay, so I was talking with my girlfriend about this, and she was asking me about it, and I said, well, my problem, not my problem, but Jesus doesn't change, right?
Mm,
As a character, he doesn't change, and that's by design, obviously. I mean, he can't change. He's already made the decision that he's going to fulfill the mission of sacrificing himself for the sins of man before
mm,
he's ever begotten into the world. So he
yeah.
doesn't make a choice in the usual literary sense of that word while we're watching
Mm,
him in the gospels, right? We know he
mm,
has to do what he's been sent to do. He's going to fulfill his destiny,
mm,
right? And in the Passion of the Christ, you obviously have this. You have these moments where it looks as though Christ can make a decision to go back on his word, or the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's, if this cup can pass, and those kinds of
mm.
moments. But I'm never reading that story and thinking that Jesus is going to change his mind,
Right, right, right.
right? But in the
Yeah.
Passion of the Christ movie, because of that, and Jesus isn't going to change his mind, there is a quote unquote static quality to that character. However, then he's brought before Pontius Pilate. And you got this guy who doesn't want to crucify Jesus, but he's in this untenable political situation. He's been stationed in his mind in this like outpost, you know, where he doesn't want to be. He's kind of like controlling a puppet government in this place. He wants to be back in Rome where the action is. And in Mel Gibson's film, he's immediately interesting because
Mm.
he has a
Well,
choice.
yeah, he's got a choice. He's conflicted.
He's
Right.
conflicted, right? He's a man in
Yeah.
conflict with himself, and
Yeah.
he doesn't understand the charges against Jesus. It doesn't make any sense to him, and he kind of tries to get around it by political maneuvering, but that you know washes symbolically washes his hands of the situation. But
Hmm.
that character is interesting, and
Yeah.
just as a audience member of a movie, I want to watch that guy. I
Mm-hmm.
know what Jesus is going to do, but I want to see where they'll take Pontius Pilate.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, but see, people can't a lot. there's a lot of people who the nuances of just sort of pointing that out or something, just like the Lord of the, the Tolkien thing comes off as a quote unquote criticism. A lot of people, I think, struggle with like these sort of value neutral observations about things. Yes, Pontius Pilate's more interesting. Does that mean you're supposed to be like Pontius Pilate or something? Or
No,
no, no,
no.
no. It's just we're talking about like the narrative, how the narrative works,
Yeah, I'm talking
right?
about these stories as stories,
Right, right, right.
which
Yeah,
it's clear to me, and I'm not even mad at it, but it's clear to
yeah.
me that Tolkien is one of the authors who a lot of people attach sort of semi-religious
Yeah.
meaning to. And I think like Tolkien, it sort of makes sense that that's people's relationship with Tolkien. I'm not even upset about that. It kind of makes sense.
Well,
Um,
I mean, he's a myth maker
that's
on a
right.
level that not a lot, there aren't many other writers that there's a photograph of who are myth makers on the level of Tolkien. I
That's
don't,
that's correct. That's correct. He's very just teaching this one book. He's very skillful in the way he tells his story. And one
Mhm.
of the things I pointed out to my students, like that first book in the trilogy, this is going to be a world that throws orcs and wizards and balrogs and all
Right.
this fantastical stuff at us. But it starts with an old dude's birthday party.
Ah, okay,
Something that's
okay.
completely relatable to any reader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Right.
kind of banal in a way, you
Totally
know.
banal, very
Yeah,
familiar. Old
yeah,
dude's having a birthday party, and boy, does he look good for his age.
yeah.
Right. And then there's a kind of
Yeah,
mystery you fall into that. But that he
right.
does all that stuff so skillfully.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
And
I
that gra
really have respect.
and that grounds it. That makes it
Totally.
puts it in the real world. Yeah. Yeah.
And he has characters in the first and second chapters who are just, round the tavern kind of hobbits who don't believe stories about the fantastical beasts in their own world.
Oh, that's cool. I
So
like
there's this
that.
scene in the
Yeah.
second chapter where Sam is at the local tavern and, Sam's entranced by these stories of elves and dragons and all this. And he starts talking about it. And this guy's like, basically shut up. If I wanted to hear childhood stories, I could go home and hear those. And
Mhm.
Sam goes, well, but just take dragons. And the guy's like, no, thank you. I won't take them. And he's like, there's no one hasn't been seen in decades, and there's no cause to believe they exist. And I'm like, that is a very skillful rhetorical strategy Tolkien is using on the reader
Mhm.
because any skepticism the reader might have about these fantastical beasts, a character in this world shares them,
Yes.
and the character will be proved wrong.
Right. And then yeah, no, that's very interesting. And then the reader then sort of understands on some level that they've been proven wrong for not believing
That's
in
right.
them, right?
That's
But
right.
they've been allowed to not believe in them because this character doesn't believe in them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's very, very
Usually,
interesting.
in more skillfully told ghost stories, horror films or whatever,
Hmm.
there's there's that kind of segment at the beginning of the film where there are people who don't believe in the supernatural thing.
Hmm.
Um, and that stands as a surrogate for our own disbelief.
Right, right. Well, and if you think about, I mean, the dynamic, the dramatic tension that exists at the core of the X-Files show,
Right.
that's what makes the X-Files show work, is that you have these two characters who one is a believer and one is a skeptic, and yet as you sort of go down the line of their characteristics, there's moments where it's like, okay, well, yeah, Mulder believes whatever, and Scully doesn't believe in anything. But then it's like, oh, but Mulder's actually more honest with himself about this thing, but she's more practical. Like, right?
Right.
They end up sort of enmeshed into this sort of paired worldview that
Right.
there's a lot of drama, and there's a level at which you as a viewer, one moment you're Mulder, one moment you're Scully, and them figuring it out is you figuring it out to a certain way. And that's part of the reason a show like that works so well. You can't,
Yeah.
it wouldn't work as well if you just had one of those characters. You need to have them in this sort of friendly opposition to each other.
Well, it's one of those series um, where we kind of realize that like these two characters together make a complete person.
Right, right, right. Yeah, those are the forces going on in the head of any sort of reasonable person, right?
Right.
It's like, most people will be like, well, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I just don't see the evidence, right? That's like the
Right.
average person's sort of attitude about supernatural or aliens or whatever, right? Yeah, so yeah, they're a manifestation of that conversation going on in people's heads, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mulder is that sort of the part of us who is more open to, the unexplainable, inexplainable, who has faith, who recognizes there's something beyond the grasp of our senses
Mm-hmm.
or our
Hmm.
reason.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, and that's yeah, yeah. So I find all of that stuff pretty interesting. And as a writer, and I play in the speculative realm, uh, you do kind of think have these thoughts about like, okay, how do you get the reader to, as soon as they encounter that they don't just go, ah, that's stupid. Like
Right.
that's not how things work. How do you get them into that? Because we're gonna go into territory where, sure, some law, some scientific rule is
Mhm.
violated at some level, right? But how do we get people so when that happens, how do we get a reader so when that happens, they're cool with it? Um, and it depends reader to reader. Some people start
Mhm.
off cool with it, right? But
Well, Tolkien
yeah.
charms you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was asking my students like why are the hobbits so charming? And they just immediately were like, well, they're basically benign, and
Right.
where they aren't benign, where they have little petty things, they're petty about things that are all well are actually benign, are harmless. They like food and they like sleep and they like comfort and they'll
Mm.
bicker about presents, but
Right.
they're not, beings of oppression. They're not trying to
Right.
impose their will on blah, 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 blah. So
They're
there's a,
they're they're like children in a way. It's like you see them
they're like
fighting and you're like,
children.
oh, that's kind of cute.
Yeah. And they're, or
Yeah.
like, farmers,
Mhm.
rustic farmers, not Flannery O'Connor's farmers, but,
Right.
they're rustics.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
we recognize that. And they're also small. The fact that they're
Yeah.
small in stature goes a long way.
They're not threatening. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they live in a hole, right? But the
Right.
holes are nice holes. They live underground. So like I think we're the readers. Oh, if you like Tolkien, you're charmed enough by that when we're ushered into, Nazgul
Mhm.
and I think we've been prepared and we've also become interested in the relationships between the characters.
Yeah. Well, is there, I mean, and now I'm just speculating because again, I haven't read Tolkien. But now it strikes me too. It's like, okay, you've got these sort of charming characters. There's a certain degree of vulnerability about them because that is tied up into their how charming they are. But I mean, is part of the dramatic interest of the book too that now you're going to see these characters who are vulnerable, and that's part of the reason you like them. Now they're subjected to this trial
Mm-hmm.
that in a sense we're like, well, they're not equipped for this. Like they're not, this isn't something that they're ready to handle necessarily. So now we
Right.
got to find out if they get through it or not. um
I think that's a big part of the book's appeal. And then you have these other characters that walk into their world and they're interesting and they're not small. They're big and
mhm.
some are, highly competent and, some
Right,
are tortured and so you're kind of off to the races. What
right.
matters is that Tolkien sells the importance of this object that one of the hobbits has, this ring, as being central to the fate of the entire world we're reading about.
Right, right, right. And you can consolidate that into one portable image. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. A portable image and a portable, like, it's a dramatic item, right?
Hmm.
Like if you were on stage, you could hand that to someone, in a
Right.
play, and there it would be freighted with all of this stuff,
Yeah.
and this thing has properties, and we don't quite know what the properties are. As readers, we're waiting to see a certain amount of this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's quite well done. And then the second chapter, Tolkien realizes that he's got to provide all of this greater context. He's got to like explain why some of the world is the way it is. So Gandalf has been out on an investigation and he comes back and he sits beside Frodo and he tells him this goes back thousands and thousands of years, right? That
Hmm.
chapter is maybe like 20 pages, and Frodo is a kind of surrogate for the reader. When we don't understand, Frodo is like, well, "Why is that, Gandalf?" I'm being kind of
Hmm.
crude with it, but it's quite
Yeah.
skillfully done.
Yeah.
Um, and Gandalf is talking about events that mattered thousands of years ago and events that reach into the present day. And he is also an actor in the story he's telling. And that's like it's very interesting just as a storyteller to see how Tolkien prevents that from being a 20-page exposition dump. But I was
Right.
trying to get my students to see how Tolkien connects the reader with the familiar before ever taking us into anything that's strange.
Mm.
And I was telling them, like I've seen students write fantasy projects over the years, and the ones that are less successful are the ones where from the first paragraph it's like when Gygax of Gargon came down to the
Right.
river Glotagor, and
Yeah.
you start with just hurling, unfamiliar objects at the reader, and there's only so much the reader can process.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And apparently Tolkien's very good at that. I know Ursula Le Guin is very good at this,
Hmm.
like making these things feel like giving you a moment to buy in,
Right.
right? Yeah, and it's done in different ways. I mean, in Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, it starts out on another planet and that you're there, but she has this opening chapter that renders everything so beautifully and engagingly. You're just interested in how she's describing the thing, and
Hmm.
by the end you're like, oh, she just installed an image of this place in my mind, so now
Right.
I'm like, I've seen the first chapter of The Left Hand of Darkness in dreams I've had. Like, she put it in
Wow.
my head, and now chapter two, yeah, I'm in that world. Like, I'm
Amazing.
cool. I'm cool with whatever she does now, as long as it's like consistent with the logic she's already established. I'm good. Um, so I think there's probably different ways to kind of get this buy-in. And there's also different readers are going to have different levels of tolerance. Somebody
That's
whose
right.
favorite genre is fantasy and that's most of what they read, they're going to
Right.
be fine with the on the planet Gargax. They're going to
Hmm.
roll with that more.
Hmm.
It kind of depends on who you're trying to appeal to, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Tolkien has a number of gifts as a storyteller. I think the gift he has that no one can touch is his ability to make every rock and tree of this world feel like it has 10,000-year-old history.
Right. Right.
And also what's impressive is how little, there's a certain amount of that stuff, but how little of that stuff touches the page. It's all
Mm.
informing what's going on, but he doesn't stop and provide a history lesson for every little thing.
Right. Of
You just
course.
get
Yeah.
you feel the history behind it. You realize he has it all worked out. He's
Right.
vividly imagined this world
Yeah. And
to the
he's
umpteenth degree.
Right. So he's just working from that space of just bringing, so details just kind of show up. And it's impressive. I mean, again, I haven't read it, but just that description, that's impressive because a lot of people I've read plenty of stories and books that are set in my world that follow
Hmm.
the rules my world does that don't seem to pull it, that feel artificial. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to do it in a completely contrived world is doubly impressive to me.
Yeah, I tell my students that it's harder to evoke, or just as difficult, rather, to
Hmm.
evoke Charlotte, North Carolina in 2025,
Hmm.
as it is Middle Earth in the
Yes.
second or third age, because you can't assume that the reader's been to Charlotte, North Carolina, so you have to
Yep.
make decisions about that world, and your Charlotte can be whatever you want it to be,
Hmm.
however you're framing that world. Um,
Hmm.
but you have to make that world feel lived in and vibrant and vivid.
Hmm.
It's
Indeed.
incumbent on you as a storyteller to figure it out.
Yeah, that is definitely part of your job. Now, uh, there's this is sort of loosely related because we're talking about how Tolkien pulls all this off, but there's a little bit of a discussion on social media in the last couple of weeks here about I would say splitting the literary world in half
Hmm.
between plot and no plot, between
Oh gosh, this again.
there's right. There's a tweet, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion on this, of course, and people should read the books that are interesting to them. But
Yeah.
um, this notion that I'm reading a tweet by Emmett Stinson. Shout out to Emmett if you hear this. This is uh, uh, this isn't me disagreeing with you. This is me just, I think you encapsulated something that's an interesting talking point that I have thoughts about. Part of his tweet says, most literary fiction has too much plot and ends up being corny as a result. I don't know if I disagree with that exactly, other than I like plot personally. I
I do
mean,
too.
so I've read things that don't have plot. We talked about on our most recent sort of main episode, My Struggle. We talked about a book that I think some people would say doesn't have a plot.
Hmm.
I would disagree with that assessment.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I almost think that the books that are truly that are pure plotless, their plot is just subtle.
Yeah. I mean, there are plotless books in some
Sure.
senses,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and also this goes in waves, right? That like in the 80s, it became fashionable for people to talk about character driven stories or
Sure.
voice driven stories, right? And
Hmm.
then, like, you'll have moments where plot will kind of return, and you'll have a series of very good novels that have, really strong, solid plots. I think the larger problem, whether there is too much plot or whether there's not enough plot, is that too few literary fiction writers are skilled at basic storytelling mechanics and
Mm.
plot mechanics. And plot
Mm.
is difficult. It's difficult to do well. It's easy
Yes.
for it to be corny.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the part where I think he's kind of right is like that claim. Most literary fiction has too much plot and ends up being corny as a result. I, I don't know about most. That's a tricky one, but like there's plenty of it that's probably true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I would say that a lot of literary fiction ends up being corny because the writers aren't skilled at plot.
Yeah. Right.
They're
Right.
not
Yeah.
skillful with it.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think about, yeah, I guess my initial response to this plot versus, what's the point, so why are we even bothering with plot? I think at some point, and this is not the tweet I was referring to, and I don't have it handy, but there was another one that was sort of like plot is for kids. I was like,
I mean, that's
I don't think
ridiculous.
that
It's
seems kind of
absurd.
ridiculous to me
It's
because,
absurd.
yeah, I mean,
Completely absurd. If you're okay, well, this doesn't happen anymore because, we all have these on demand
mhm,
streaming services.
mhm.
But Brad, back in our day, if you
Yeah.
if you missed your favorite television show,
Oh man.
right? And
Yeah.
your mom or dad hadn't put a VCR tape, a cassette in the VCR and
Yeah.
pressed record, and you wanted to know what happened,
Hmm.
like, and you didn't want to wait around for the rerun in 6 months, you would call your buddy and say, "Hey,
Right.
I missed the X Files last night. What
Yep. Yep.
happened?" And
Right.
you wouldn't say, "Oh, what happened? Well, there was this real kind of interesting, Scully was lit in an interesting light, and then there was this great dialogue back and forth." And you're like, "No, no,
Right.
no, no, no. What
What
happened?
happened?
What
Right. What
happened?"
Yeah. And ultimately what you're looking for, in my opinion, like if you're gonna like boil it down as much as possible, you're asking your friend, what line was crossed that cannot be crossed back?
That's
What
right.
what has happened that is now irrevocable that has
Yeah.
changed the course of this thing?
What did these
Um,
characters do? And what
yeah.
were the results of their actions?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because
And
the next episode's going to come and it's not going to make sense if I don't know.
yes,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
Breaking Bad was hitting on all cylinders,
Yeah.
you needed to know what Walter did in that episode to understand
Yes.
the next. I mean, you
Yes.
couldn't just like, oh, well, gosh, it was beautifully lit and the
Right.
cinematography was
Right.
cool and
Yeah, and they had this line, this great line that was,
yeah,
so beautifully said, which is great when you're watching it. That's all,
100%.
adds to it, but it's not. Yeah,
It's all
yeah.
in the context of a story that's
Hmm.
where people are doing things and there are consequences for the things that they do.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, like
Y-
I'm William Gass, who wrote in the heart of the country and the
Yeah,
tunnel. He came
yeah.
to University of Denver when I was there,
Oh
and
man, that's awesome.
yeah, I got to meet him, and
It's
I
amazing.
attended a talk he gave on art. He knows a tremendous amount, or knew a tremendous
Yeah.
amount about art, and then he gave a talk on fiction writing. And I had just read In the Heart of the Country, and he was taking questions, and I said, um, "How do you approach plot?" Because the stories I've read, you have this kind of oblique approach, and he
Mhm.
got angry, and he said, "Plot." Had like that's not what literary writers do. I mean,
Hmm.
this is an old kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
He felt or he acted as though he were very insulted by my question, and I
yeah,
was like, "Well, sorry, I got that.
yeah,
Talking about plot might be an okay thing to ask." And
yeah.
then it was so bad that faculty members like came up afterwards and they were like, "I liked your question." Like they felt like you really bitten my head off. It's fine.
Yeah.
Now I have a William Gass story, so
Right. No, it's great. And
I enjoyed it.
he was a notorious curmudgeon, right? So
Yeah, yeah, he's very
yeah.
curmudgeony
Yeah.
and that's fantastic.
And a
Um,
brilliant guy. But yeah, yeah.
yeah, he's
But
a
yeah,
brilliant guy.
to say that his books, I mean, I've read The Tunnel and I've read Omensetter's like I think on this show we should talk The Tunnel at some point.
Yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah.
but those books aren't plotless. They're
No,
the plot isn't it's not Lord of the Rings. It's not like a every clearly delineated. It's not clearly delineated episodes escalating in a particular direction necessarily, but like
that's right.
things happen and then
Yes,
what comes after is a dealing with that thing that happened, right?
right.
Which, it's not they're not plotless. Yeah.
Is it the Peterson kid where the guy tunnels through snow?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't read that. Yeah.
Um, I'm I- I'm either confusing that with the title story in the heart of the country, but there's one kind of uh, harrowing story in that collection
Mm,
where this character's tunneling through snow and there's been this
mm,
big snowstorm. And I certainly don't think of that as being plotless. I think something like The
man.
Tunnel is less interested in plot
Yes.
than it is with language.
Yes, that's very true.
Um,
Right, right.
yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, plot's not plot. Plot isn't going anywhere. I don't know. I didn't take umbrage with this like line of reasoning, but like as a writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about plot.
Me too.
I mean, it's and I wouldn't claim it's necessarily even my strongest suit necessarily, but like ultimately like the thing's got to be a chain of events that make sense or what am I to me it's like what am I doing?
I spend a massive amount of time thinking about the
Yeah.
plot and then thinking about how to make the things that happen credible.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then what
Yeah.
effect those things have on the characters and how that advances
Right.
both the story, their psychology, and the reader's interest. So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I don't take offense at anything, but maybe
No.
I get prickly because I'm just like, well, these people aren't skillful storytellers. I mean, it's
There
corny
is a
because it's not skillful.
yeah, well there's definitely yeah, if it was well done it wouldn't come across as corny. So, yeah, I think the lesson might be that you know, perhaps literary fiction's strong suit isn't plot, and maybe, you know, maybe that's a like, as you say, is something of a trend that will, you know, change over time.
I think it
Um
should be. I think
yeah.
literary fiction's, I think the responsibility of literary fiction is to be everything is a strong suit.
That's yeah, yes, amen. That's how I think of it. I mean, that's when I sit down to do. I'm, you know, I have strengths and weaknesses. I'm sure you, as a writer, you think of yourself as having strengths and weaknesses, but like, yeah, you're trying to do everything well. I don't know what I don't know what the alternative is.
George Saunders came and talked to us. He was a really sweet guy.
Yeah,
We did,
I got to meet George Saunders too.
yeah,
He's great.
very
Yeah,
nice guy, very
yeah,
sweet, very
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
And he gave like a talk, and then we had a workshop with him, and then he gave a reading.
Hmm.
And I had picked up my mail on my way to the talk. It was like early afternoon, and I ordered a Van Halen like bootleg
Hell yeah.
VCR cassette, right? And
Yeah.
so I had it in my hands when I walked up to shake his hand, and he shook my hand, and then he goes, Van Halen.
Oh,
All right, and we
really?
stood there. Yeah, we stood
Cool.
there talking about Van Halen, and he was like, "I always tell my students, you know, what Ed said about getting the Brown sound." Um,
Mm,
but he said this. He had said something I thought was really insightful in the workshop. He said that the way that you handle the various attributes of fiction, the way you handle setting, or the way you handle dialogue, or the way you handle exposition, or whatever it is, you know, I really despise reading about like mountains and fields in books when there's like
mm,
this long kind of scenic description. People are
yeah.
gonna be like, "What do you like, Blood Meridian?"
Yeah.
Um, so I'm when I realize that the landscape description completely separated from the character is going to go on and on and on, I
Hmm.
start to, and so I tend to approach that in a different way. So
Hmm.
Saunders just said the things you lean toward, you know, as being your strong suit, and the things you shy away from as being vulnerabilities. That is what style is.
Ah, yeah. I can
And I
see
thought that
that.
was a really good down and dirty definition of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's certainly onto something there. I
Yeah.
can get with that. Yeah,
Good guy.
yeah,
Funny
yeah,
guy.
yeah. Funny guy, smart, super sweet. Yeah,
Very sweet guy.
I counted as a privilege that I got to sit in a room with him for a little bit.
100% same.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was another, you know, I on these melee episodes, I think over time we're gonna sort of figure out what's cool to talk about, what's interesting to talk about, and, you know, there's always something to talk about in, you know, in regards to kind of things we're reading, things we're seeing. There was another tweet that is basically saying, quote, what is a modern American supposed to write novels about? McDonald's, social media, gas stations, driving to work, puerile relationship drama about two people who never loved each other? Um,
No, this annoys me.
I picked
This,
stuff to try to annoy you, Aaron.
yeah, this one annoys me. This one annoys me.
Right.
I quote tweeted that
Okay,
with
good.
um, this tweet from Land Shark Rides,
Oh yeah.
which I love so much that I screenshot and saved it. And that account posted, it seems to me that just walking enormous distances every day is the easiest way today to slowly cease being an individual and turn into a sort of living conduit for the forces of nature or God. Seemingly,
Right.
every small town has a strange man who just walks around all the time daily. And I was like,
Right.
that's fantastic. For one, it's true,
Yeah.
but I thought that was fascinating. It would make
Yeah.
some kind of good story or novel. And so I quote tweeted it with that. I'm like, this
Yeah.
is what you write about.
Yeah, yeah. I see that tweet. I'm like, oh my God, there's so much stuff to write about. First of all, that question about, what are they supposed to write about McDonald's, social media, whatever, and they make a list of things. First of all, yes, you can write about all of those
That's
things.
right. That's right.
So starting off, what are they supposed to write about? This stuff? Sure, go for it. If you've got something interesting to
Yes.
say or you've got a particular eye you've had on this sort of thing, all valid, all valid subjects to my mind.
But no
But yeah,
shade to
there's
this person, but don't you kind of betray like a how boring your life is and how small your imagination is like what are you supposed to write about video games? It's like, well, maybe you should go outside.
Yeah,
There's
well,
plenty.
I mean, that's what struck me is it's like, first of all, um, I suppose if you're not a person who is, I don't know if, novelists are made or they're born, right? But like, I know for me, I see a lot of stuff just in day to day that, sometimes it's just you can describe it in a phrase. That's just like, oh, that might be interesting to show up in a piece of writing in some way,
Man, I
like
see stuff all the time. The
all the
other day,
time.
I walked up to the store to get some Zen, and there
Yeah.
was this man, shirtless man in like jorts, who
Right.
was having what I can only describe as a MMA match with a shopping cart. And I don't mean the guy was like pushing the cart and got frustrated with it. I mean,
Yeah.
like it. I
Fighting it.
stood there and watched him a while. Like he would like wrestle it one way, and then he would turn it back the other way, and then he
Right.
would wrestle with it and yell. And this went on and on.
Right.
Like I went into the store and came out, and he was still in
So,
the match.
right. Right. Right.
So
Well, and if you can't see that a way to turn that into somehow the shopping cart is an objective correlative for something else, like that's a story. That's a short
yeah,
story right
and I
there.
was
It's just
standing
this
there,
guy fighting a cart and you
and then
watching it.
I was standing
Yeah.
there watching because he was still at it, and I
Yeah.
wanted to see who won. Um, And then like this woman was standing there too, and she walked up to me and she goes, "Is there anyone we can call?" And I
Right.
said, "Well, I said if you want to call someone, I suppose the police." And she goes, "Well, I'd like to keep from doing that." And I'm like,
Right. Then
"Well,
don't
if
call
you're
anybody.
then don't call anybody." I was like, "Well, aren't you concerned that he might like walk out into the street and hurt himself or something?" I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what the right,
Yeah.
by the way, I don't know what the right answer there is.
Well,
I ended up not calling anyone, but like
yeah.
maybe that guy walked out in front of a car after I was
Yeah.
gone. I mean, he
Well, and then
wasn't,
there you go. There's the sort of moral tension of that story. If you're
that's
going to
right.
write that
There you
down, it's like,
go.
man, what do you do? Do you call the police? Do you
I don't
try to
know.
intervene? Do you, what do you? I don't know what to do. Yeah, yeah,
I had that feeling that I never had in rural areas because I grew up in the woods in Oklahoma, but I've only had in cities where I was just like,
yep, yeah, yeah,
walk on past. Because, like, in a city, my feeling is that nothing I can do about it. Whereas in
Well,
rural
and
areas, I was always like, if there was some old boy on the side of the road, like, you would stop and talk to him or whatever.
right, yeah. There's well, it's whatever high trust, low density is changes a
Right,
lot
right,
versus the opposite. Yeah, yeah,
right.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think about that sometimes too. Like, I've got some property in northern Michigan and we got neighbors, but all of us got some acreage. So they're not on top of you. They're just
Hmm.
the next guy that lives on this road.
Right.
Um, I know those people better than I
Yep.
know my neighbors down here in basically the suburbs.
People tend to look after each other.
Yeah, yeah, they saw me out there and they stopped by and met and were like, we should probably have each other's phone numbers in case something happens. And I'll be up there this summer and I'll probably walk over to John's at some point and if he's out there doing something and say hello and maybe we drink a beer that night. But we don't do that
So
where I live
my
normally.
89-year-old grandfather was
Yeah,
driving through a little town of Jennings, Oklahoma. I mean,
yeah,
it has like a post office and like a little swap meet, a couple of quick trips, and that's about it.
yeah.
He was driving through and he looked like off to his left or whatever, and there was a cop approaching what looked like an abandoned building with his pistol drawn, right?
Oh my God.
And my granddad was like, "Oh, yeah, exactly what you said, right?" So
Yeah,
he pulled over, jumped out of the truck and walked over to the guy. And he goes, "What's going on? Is something wrong?" And the guy goes, "Have you got a gun on you?" My
Man.
granddad goes, "Well, yeah. I've been, it's Oklahoma, concealed carry, right?" He was like, "Yeah."
Right.
The guy goes, "Well, get it out. We're going in." Right. And so my granddad's like, "Well, shoot fire." Right. So he pulls out his pistol and they stack up on either side of the door like they're Navy SEALs or something. Right. And then like the cop like opens the door and like, tells my granddad, "We're going to go through and clear the rooms." And so like my 89-year-old grandfather is going through this abandoned building with a pistol. And
Whoa.
when they get, there's nothing in it. When
Yeah.
he gets done, he puts his, holsters his pistol and he goes, "Well, what was all that about?" And the
Yeah.
cop goes, What do you mean?" He goes,
Yeah.
"Well, why were you coming in here?"
Yeah.
And the cop goes, "Oh, I don't know. I just wanted to see what was inside." My granddad
What?
like
Yeah.
turned around. He goes, "Well, you sorry rascal.
Right.
You got me all worked up and blah, blah, blah." And he went and got in his truck and drove off in disgust. But like those kind of interactions are quite common in a rural area. Whereas if
Yeah.
like I was driving down the road and I saw a cop on someone's porch, I'd keep on
Yep.
driving,
You just keep
man.
going, man. Hopefully I get
Nope.
out of here before something happens. Yeah.
Nope. Not
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. Wild. That's so funny, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then that's a little, yeah. What are Americans supposed to write about? Write that
Right
bit
that.
right there. Right.
Right
Turn
there.
that
There
into
you
a,
go.
8 to 10, 12 page short story. I mean, that might not be a novel in and of itself. It's just one episode, but you know, you could turn that into something for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, what have you so for folks who are listening along, I think the next book we're going to dive deep into is William Gibson's Neuromancer. But Aaron, what have you been reading lately, if anything, other than stuff for
Man,
the show?
weird stuff. So I've been reading a book that W. Norton put out in 1983, 84, and it's the Carl Sagan hosted a kind of, I guess, what's kind of a symposium. It was
Hmm.
himself and all these other scientists who studied nuclear winter, and it's the basically kind of the minutes of that symposium. It's called "The Cold and the Dark,"
Hmm.
and it's about what nuclear winter looks like. And all these scientists are talking about, based on, our calculations, and they show how a full nuclear exchange between the United States and then the Soviet Union, the catastrophic effect that would have on weather systems, everything, infrastructure, climate. Um, and they believe that the only creatures that would survive would be rats, roaches, and scorpions.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't like any of those things.
I
There's
don't
those
like any
three
of those things
things.
either.
Yeah.
Apparently, there would be a massive explosion in the rat population, like an
I
almost
get
unbelievable, because there would be all these carcasses to feed on.
right, and they're all scavengers. So yeah, for
Yeah,
a while anyway. But then, I mean, eventually, I don't know what the timeline is, but eventually, there's not going to be any carcasses to eat either, right? I don't know. That's 2 months down the line, 6 months down the line. There's not going to
right.
be. So then you're gonna have the huge bolus of rat population that's all going to die off.
Yeah, they'll start eating each other.
Oh my God.
And then, like, you also have like these fires that go on for years
Oof.
because all this infrastructure will be targeted. So, like, coal seams will continue to burn for
Right.
years.
Right.
Like oil facilities, and like all
Yeah.
of that is just going to burn and burn and burn.
Yeah.
Eventually,
Yeah.
the world comes back, which is the part that I find so interesting. Like, eventually,
Mm.
it comes back. So, in a full nuclear exchange, about 1.5 billion people die immediately,
Oof.
and then about 3 to 5 billion die um, in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah.
But then you still got 3 billion people on the planet.
Right. Right.
So you're back to like, I don't know what, turn of the 20th century numbers or something.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you've still got tons of. I mean, 3 billion people is a lot of people.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so like, then everything becomes a political kind of struggle to rebuild governments and everything.
Mm. Hmm.
There's some
Hmm.
nations who would be the hardest hit, like, clearly, UK, Russia, United States, China would be very hard hit.
Well,
Japan,
it's yeah.
North Korea, like, but then you have places like New Zealand who might not be touched at all.
Right.
And
Yeah,
most,
Tierra del Fuego. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
places that are not going to get caught
yeah,
at nearly as caught up in this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And most of Africa would be untouched. However, the places all over the world that depend on, you know, the United States and other countries to export grain and various products, you would have mass populations who would starve because would there be a lack of, I mean, all the services we take for granted would be gone
Mhm.
immediately.
Right.
There'd be
Yeah.
no
So
medical
now,
care. There'd be no
yeah,
medicine to speak of. There would be no internet. There'd be no electricity. There would be no gas. There would be no, like, all that stuff goes away. Like
right.
in 15 minutes, actually. That's how long it takes.
Man, yeah. And then what do you, I mean, n very few, well, and this is where you get to the point where people who are living slightly less globalized lives are probably going to make it better anyway, right?
Probably,
If you're
probably.
living if you don't get direct hit and you're mostly living on the sort of productivity of your local environment and you're not relying on day to day on a lot of international goods, you're probably better set up to survive such a situation.
In an interview he gave after The Road came out, Cormac McCarthy said that if he had a different family situation, that he would take his son and go to New Zealand.
Oh, really? Because the idea is that that's like sort of going to be unaffected.
Yeah, and they have very aggressive non-nuclear, um, legislation, treaties, etc. So it doesn't
Right.
seem like there would be a reason to nuke New Zealand, and maybe New Zealand is. You can't say unaffected because they would be affected by the products that they have, and that they import. Um, but they would certainly be less affected than the I-90 corridor of the eastern United States,
Right.
which would just
Absolutely.
be incinerated immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's yeah. If somebody's gonna drop some bombs, that's one of the places they're gonna do it for sure.
There
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
military site that I'm not going to say its name, though I know it, that would be untouched.
Oh.
That is in Pennsylvania, that they built after World War II,
Huh.
and that is referred to as the second or a backup Pentagon. Um,
Oh.
yeah, it can withstand like however many megaton nuclear warheads, and they have
Right.
like they have underground hospitals and everything else down there. Yeah, it's published under the title The Cold and the Dark.
Hmm. Interesting. So what drew you to this? Just interest, or do you think
Well,
it's like
so
part
I've
of?
been I've been writing this novel for the past year and a half about um, people living in the United States reemerging after a
Ah,
full exchange of nuclear warheads. So I'm not interested in the apocalypse or post-apocalypse. I'm interested in the stuff that happens when society starts to come back together.
cool. All right.
So
Well,
I'm
that's
trying to,
a
yeah, I'm
this
trying to,
will this I think people are gonna really look forward to this. I mean, this is
yeah, hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully.
yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah.
figure out exactly what the world looks like 50 years after a full nuclear exchange, which you
Right.
can only theorize about, but
Of course. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there are different camps of scientists. There are scientists who believe that it's catastrophic to the level of an extinction event, and there are scientists who believe that it is certainly catastrophic, but eventually humans return. And in
Mhm.
what shape and in what capacity is you know, the
Yeah.
sticking point.
Right. Well, there have been we don't have tremendous insight into these moments, but there have been like giant enormous population bottlenecks in human history.
That's right.
The one that I think about a lot, and it's debated about how much it actually impacted populations, but the Toba catastrophe, the super volcano of 74,000 years ago, that's like
Oh,
It's basically the size of, this is an exaggeration, but not by much. It was like the size of every volcano in recorded history put together, happening at once. And early on, there were thoughts that this brought like the human population down into the tens of thousands, but now it's a little disputed that there were probably more pockets that survived it than initially thought. But
That's
um,
interesting.
yeah,
That's
but there are
interesting.
there are definitely moments in that where, you looking in the genetic code, it's like, oh yeah, looks like looks like a lot of there was a lot of cul-de-sacs in the genetic lines,
Wow.
here and there.
Wow.
So it's pretty interesting. And those are obviously, well before recorded history, written history or of any kind. So
This is
yeah.
well before like people came across the land bridge into North America.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, 74,000 years ago for sure. There are some, I mean, the theory of when humans came to North and South America has been undergoing some massive revisions in recent years. So there are people who claim that there were humans here around 74,000 years ago, but
Right.
generally that's before. Because I mean, up until recently, it was like a post. The idea was that basically humans came to the Americas like right after the Ice Age, but now there's been
Hmm.
some sites that have been found that are older than that, and it's probably a multiple crossings
Aren't yeah,
scenario.
aren't there like isn't there an idea that like the Clovis people of Texas
Mhm.
were here maybe like 20,000 years ago? I like
Yeah.
don't cite me on
Yeah.
that. I just
Yeah, I don't know the exact years, but for a long time that was considered like the first population is some group of people that we call Clovis, and we identify by the particular shape of the tools that they made.
hmm.
That was the first peoples. But now there have been some sites that have been reliably dated to be older than that, particularly along the
Wow.
along the coastline. So it's not that the Clovis were early and they were there, but there's some suggestion that there were peoples here before that. Um,
Fascinating.
and this isn't like Graham Hancock territory. There
Right.
is all that too to a person could think about, but this is like, it's changing science. They're just finding more stuff. So the story has to change to adapt. So yeah.
Wow.
There are some sites that suggest up to 100,000 years ago in South America. So yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff for sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, um, stuff I've been reading.
Yeah, yeah.
It's to tee it up. So I left this out of our conversation we had about my struggle, and I kind of I was going to bring it in at the time. But have you read any Nathaniel West?
Wait, I think we were assigned Day of the Locust and Miss Lonely
Okay.
Hearts in
Yes.
grad
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. 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 So I had never read them before, and I just read them, I don't know, in the last month or so, and they're both very short.
Hmm.
I think the two of them together is shorter than the average novel probably. But man, I was sort of bowled over by how good I think both
Hmm.
of them are.
Fantastic.
Particularly, yeah, I Miss Lonely Hearts kind of I kind of glommed onto Miss Lonely Hearts a little bit more than Day of the Locust, but Day of the
Hmm.
Locust is also hilarious. Uh, it's pretty incredible stuff, and I think I got thinking about it, and in the intro to these, Jonathan Latham talks about he basically says, Nathaniel West is, he comes from the same sort of stew as people like Hemingway and Faulkner and Fitzgerald, but he's a more obvious precursor to writers like Thomas Pynchon and George Saunders and PKD than say Fitzgerald or Hemingway. And I think there's probably something to that. And also sort of mentions the fact that he died when he was 37. I mean, you're talking about
Ouch.
one of the great careers cut short. Give him another decade, what would he have come up? It seemed like he was just figuring out how to write a novel when he died. So,
Wow.
you can imagine how much where he was going to go.
Hmm.
And yeah, yeah, the Miss Lonely Hearts is just, it's such you can feel, I mean, it's interesting because it's written in Miss Lonely Hearts is I think written in 1931. So, Sound and the Fury came out in 1929. Gatsby comes out in 1925. These are all basically happening at the same
Hmm.
time. And I think the big difference with Nathanael West is he was also a Dadaist. So,
Huh.
you take all of the influences that, Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Faulkner and a variety of other, capital M modernists had. And I think West is like you add not only Dada, but you add cinema. I mean, he was a screenwriter. He wrote a dozen or wrote or co-wrote a dozen films that were produced in the 30s and into the 40s, even after his death. And so I think he was more conscious of cinema than some of these other people. I mean, Faulkner wrote in Hollywood too, but I think in him I think he compartmentalized that work a little bit more than Nathaniel
Hmm.
West did. Like he was Faulkner seemed like he was bringing literary stuff to bear on films, whereas
Right.
West seems like his brain is doing both of them at the same time. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so he's a cool little like I really think if you're trying to like understand like what the hell was modernism, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
I think Nathaniel West is probably needs to be part of that conversation. Um to just kind of understand what was going on with the collective project of writing books. He's given me he's helped me understand what was happening a little bit better, I guess is ultimately the point.
That's
Um,
interesting. I remember a
yeah.
buddy in that grad class I had where we read that.
Hmm.
He said that we had like a New Directions paperback volume,
Hmm.
and with both novels, half of it was Miss Lonely Hearts, half of it was Day of the Locust. And he
Yeah.
said, you can look over here, you can look over to the left side and you have modernism, and you look over to the right side, you have postmodernism.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it
Yeah,
was
I think
pretty
that's
interesting.
I think that's true. I think that's like happening in the mid 30s to Nathaniel West. And part of it is he's a really interesting guy sort of on his own right. Like he's got these contradictions in his life that I think are ultimately like the key. He's one of these people where like the literary movement is not just the things he wrote, but it sort of is happening in his life at the same
Hmm.
time. He so like he had kind of a crazy life story in a way. He didn't graduate high school, right? But he forges a bunch of stuff in his transcripts and adds some letters to his name, changes his name from Nathan Weinstein to Nathaniel West, and then he
That's what I'm
gets into
talking about.
yeah, and then he gets into Tufts. So he goes to Tufts. He doesn't without graduating high school because he basically lied on his transcript. And then
Fantastic.
and then from there he ends up going to Brown because he combines his transcript with another student named Nathan Weinstein.
Love him.
And right, so he ends up deep into Brown without ever having taken an actual having completed an actual course.
Love it. Love it.
So he's a fraud. He's an
I
academic
love it.
fraud.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Uh, right. It's so
Couldn't
good.
love him more.
Right. But he's also at the same time, he's extremely well read. He's just not reading the stuff he's supposed to be reading. He's
Anyone who's smart enough to pull that off, they should let in. If you
right.
seriously, if you have the like presence of mind and the skill to go that far with your scam, I'm sorry, that's its own kind of talent, and
Yeah.
you need to be at Goldman Sachs.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You have to come away with saying like, oh, this guy knows how to, he knows how to play some kind of game,
Dude knows how to party.
at a very
Dude,
high level. Yeah.
dude's a good time. Dude's a
Yeah.
good time. He knows how to party.
Yeah. 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 But I just found that, that interesting. So that's happening, but he's also at the same time like writing essays and letters about how like the loss of standards is sort of the central problem of the West, right? Like the 20th
Interesting.
century is where values go to die. And yet at the same time, he spends his life lying about his credentials and his,
I love it. I love it.
yeah.
Well, if you lie enough, you do grow concerned that the values have deteriorated.
Yeah, well, there's a bit where like, man, if I'm lying this much, what's everybody else doing?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you start looking at other people askance.
Right, right, right. Yeah, but
I love a literary hustler like that. That's fantastic.
yeah, yeah, for sure. No, no. And the thing is the writing backs it up. Miss Lonely Hearts is it's short and it's super powerful. It's really funny, but it's like the darkest humor ever. I mean, he's
Right.
writing these the guy Miss Lonely Hearts, the character Miss Lonely Hearts is a man who writes the advice column for like the local newspaper or the New York newspaper, right? It's sort of set in that 1920s New York journalism world. And it's like the lowest rung job you can have is writing these crappy responses because everybody knows what the sort of response is, right? It's this vague, platitudinous, like therapy speak, but in the
Right.
1920s, right? And yet he's reading these letters and they're like breaking his heart when he reads them because these
Amazing.
people actually have problems, right? They're
Right.
writing to him with these tragic lives, and he's just supposed to
Oh.
be like, yeah, keep your chin up, and
Oh.
and it's over the course of the book, it just like this like destroys him. This fact
Amazing.
that he has to respond to these this way. It's so well done. Um, and so yeah, it ends up being yeah, it's and at the sentence and he, Miss Lonely Hearts, the character who's always called Miss Lonely Hearts, right? But is a man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh you see the way that it sort of destroys him and it causes him to have a nervous breakdown, but at the same time it's kind of funny. Like it's sort of a picaresque as he's sort of drunkenly bouncing around 1920s New York City at the same time. It's really,
Wow.
yeah, it's really, really well done. I
That's
can't recommend
fantastic.
it enough. Yeah. Yeah, definitely recommend Miss Lonely Hearts. And Day of the Locust is quite good too, but I think Miss Lonely Hearts is the masterpiece.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 So check that out, people, for
Is Day of
sure.
the Locust the one with Shrike?
Shrike is in Miss Lonely Hearts.
Oh, okay, okay.
Day of the Locust is set in Hollywood. And it's the sort of central character is a guy who I think he went to Yale or Harvard as like an art student, and
Mm,
now he like designs sets for Hollywood, and all the people around him are basically like failed Hollywood dreamers, basically.
amazing.
Yeah, it's really well done too, because like everybody's got a hustle
Right.
in that book, like everybody, and it's not that they got a hustle that they're trying to like pull the wool over somebody's eyes. It's like they're hustling themselves too, right?
Right.
The female character has like convinced herself she has everything it takes to be a Hollywood star.
Oh,
You know what I mean? And so everybody has like this thing that they've sort of deluded themselves with about
incredible.
themselves, and they've gone to Hollywood. I think his line is something about, all these people who come to California to die. And,
Wow.
and it's happening too. It's happening at a time during the golden era of Hollywood. He's writing this, whereas probably the average American thinks that Hollywood is like some kind of fantasy land,
Right.
and he's
Right.
sort of showing the dark side. For every one star, there's however 100, 1,000 people who, you
Gosh.
know, go there to just wait around until it's
Amazing.
over. Yeah, yeah, it's a
Oh, that is dark.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, what else? Oh, I'm also reading Carl Jung wrote a book on UFOs in the 1950s.
No
So I've been
way.
reading that too.
What's
Yeah.
it called?
The flying saucer phenomena, I think. It's pretty short. It's like 140, 160 pages, something like that. Yeah.
What does he
Yeah.
think? What's his opinion about all of this?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's 1955, right? And so there'd been reports and there was a bit of a fad, and there's this whole Foo Fighter thing. So it's not that dissimilar from today. There's just fewer anecdotes at the ready. I mean, his thing, I don't think he necessarily settles on what he thinks it is, but he suggests some things that I think are quite interesting. One is he suggests that it might be so the idea would be that like, okay, World War II has happened. We're some, we're in the at that time we're in the, I don't know, second act or something of the Industrial Revolution, right? And the world has become uh industrialized and electrified and connected in virtual ways that was sort of never connected before.
Hmm.
And the atom bomb and nuclear power more generally seems like we've sort of attained some godlike power, and it would be the idea that like to some degree the mystery is being squared out of life, and that the UFOs are psychic projections that we're making that are both about our anxiety about the mystery of the world being closed off and
Hmm.
also like a reminder to us that we don't have all of the answers. Um,
Interesting.
so, I mean, he talks about it as being in that thesis, and he's got a couple of them. I mean, he talks about it as being sort of a psychological artifact in a way. But it's interesting because I think most people who would say that, like, all the New Jersey drone stuff, well, that was just a panic or a
Hmm.
a collective hallucination or something, and so it doesn't mean anything. Jung
Hmm.
is saying like it might actually be some kind of collective hysteria, but here's what that would mean.
Right.
Why would we have that collective hysteria? And he finds a lot of meaning in speculating in that realm. Okay,
Right.
we're all seeing UFOs now. What the hell? Why? Why are we? If they're not real, what are
What are people
why is
saying?
everybody seeing? So it's pretty interesting on that account. Um, and I do like I do like thinking about it in those terms. Okay, let's say it's all let's say it is all just and people's imaginations. Well, that doesn't mean it's meaningless.
Of course not.
So yeah, so it's a pretty interesting book. But again, at that time, there weren't that many, there wasn't that much, there wasn't that many anecdotes to draw from. So,
Hmm.
there'd been reports and whatnot, but we didn't have nearly as many stories as there are to think about now. But it's an interesting account. And it's kind of
Hmm.
cool to go back into the 50s and, it's 1955, I think it comes out, and he's talking about UFO people witnessing UFOs in like the 1940s. And you're like, okay, so okay, well, people saw them then and people saw them now. Like, what are we dealing with? What is this
Hmm.
thing?
Hmm.
And he has a bit too where he goes into some much older art and pulls out basically things that he says are symbolizing the same thing that people were seeing in the skies in the 1940s and the 1950s. So that's kind of interesting too.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting. So we're kind of headed toward this next episode where we're getting into the cyberspace.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a I don't know, I know you've never read Neuromancer before, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are. I kind of picked it because I want to see what you think of it, to be honest.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
so I think I hope that we can have a cool conversation about
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
The
yeah.
first time someone recommended that, I was in my undergrad, and one of my undergrad buddies uh, was a real big fan of that book.
Yeah.
And he was like,
Yeah.
"You got to read this." And I was like, "Okay." And then I
Yeah.
just forgot about it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's got its devotees for sure, and it's certainly got like it's science fiction, it's future, it's supposedly set roughly in the year 2035.
Hmm.
So, we're coming up pretty close to that. So,
Interesting.
and it's not prescient, and I don't think William Gibson ever claims to be prescient.
Hmm.
So there are ways in which it is and ways in which it isn't. And I think both are kind of interesting. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, guys, look out for that next episode for us to dive into Neuromancer.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, man. All right. I think we've done good work here. We've told these
Yes,
people
sir.
what's going on in the world. This is the
That's
news,
right.
people.
That's right. madmethodpod.com. Get us on Substack, Patreon, Spotify, wherever you listen to stuff, YouTube. See you soon.